Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. The Northwest Territories chief coroner has released recommendations after investigating a firefighter's death last year. 25-year-old Adam Yeadon was killed by a falling tree while fighting a forest fire near his home of Fort Liard in July 2023. His employer, the Department of Environment and Climate Change, will now decide which, if any, of the recommendations to implement. Leanie Lambrink has our top story tonight.
The coroner has made 9 recommendations in total. A couple of them are about training, specifically training to assess dangerous trees. The coroner says all crew leaders and supervisors should get what's called danger tree assessor training. He also says any firefighters using a chainsaw should also get this kind of training. The coroner's recommendations also include considering a more protective helmet, reviewing safety equipment, and how many people with what type of training should be deployed in different circumstances.
This is a difficult subject for me to talk about. I knew Adam. I came from the department. I worked in the department for 13 years. I had very close relationships with many of the firefighters through my previous role. And I mean, from a department perspective, our number one priority is ensuring the safety of all of our staff, no matter what.
McDonald was not prepared to say whether or not his department would commit to making the changes that the coroner is recommending. But we know that dangerous tree assessments are already on the department's radar. Internal documents, which we told you about last week, show that the Department of Environment and Climate Change recommended to itself that it review and bolster that kind of training. CBC News reached out to the coroner's office to learn about how these recommendations were reached. We made that request this afternoon. We haven't heard back yet. Leanie Lambrink, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Passengers on Air India Flight 127 have finally made their way to Chicago after the Canadian military stepped in. An online bomb threat forced their plane to divert to Iqaluit yesterday. Samuel Watt has the latest.
It was late evening when this Royal Canadian Air Force's Airbus A330 rolled into Iqaluit. Relief for the roughly 200 passengers who, by midnight, had waited 18 hours to fly out. In a statement posted on X, the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness says the city isn't equipped to house these passengers and that Air India hadn't found a solution. So it took the unusual step of using military transport to whisk out the stranded passengers. For hours, the plane wasn't checked for bombs because Nunavut doesn't have explosives detective units. They had to come from outside the territory. It's not the first time Iqaluit has had an influx of passengers from diverted international flights. In 2014, 235 passengers from a Delta airline flight were housed in Iqaluit's Cadet Hall. The Air India passengers weren't allowed beyond the international security zone. Just last week, several agencies on the municipal, territorial and federal level carried out security exercises in Iqaluit. Investigations into yesterday's incident are still ongoing. Samuel Watt, CBC News, Iqaluit.
A 23-year-old Pangnuktu man has been charged with attempted murder. It comes after RCMP responded to an early morning incident on Monday. Officers found a man with serious injuries. The victim has been sent to Ottawa for medical treatment. The suspect was arrested without incident and taken into custody. A precautionary boil water advisory for Rankin Inlet has ended. The advisory stood for 96 days. The Nunavut Department of Health says it was first put in place due to work being done on the hamlet's water mains. It was the longest advisory in any Nunavut community so far this year. The government of the Northwest Territories is planning to create an on-the-land camp for homeless people in Yellowknife. It's intended as a temporary measure until the government can deliver more transitional housing. The Salvation Army has been raising the alarm recently about Yellowknife's homeless population as winter approaches. It says the men's shelter is constantly turning people away, even before the temperatures drop. John MacDonald is the NWT Deputy Minister of Executive and Indigenous Affairs. He explains what the GNWT is doing to house vulnerable people in Yellowknife.
Our intention is to create a temporary on-the-land camp as a bridging mechanism and then open up some interim transitional housing space in Yellowknife for the next year or so to alleviate some of the pressure that the NGOs are experiencing within shelters and to create space for people who are ready for that type of a supportive living arrangement with some programming and so on to help to help address some of the issues that might be contributing to why they're experiencing homelessness right now. We're not ready to announce specifics on this yet because we are working with partners. We don't want to be ahead of them, and we want to make sure that we have things ready. And we also want to be able to speak directly to those individuals who would be taking advantage of those opportunities. We're looking at making sure that we have a safe place for people and something that they can call home temporarily, recognizing it's temporary, but it would be a bridge to something more permanent in the coming months.
McDonald says it's too early to give a timeline on when the transitional housing will be ready, but he hopes it'll happen by early next year. NWT Housing Minister Lucy Kaptana says the territorial government will provide the bulk of the funding for both the transitional housing and on-the-land camp. Kaptana says it would be supplementary funding and therefore subject to approval. Yellowknife North MLA Shauna Morgan responded to this news earlier today. She says the territory needs to invest more in transitional housing.
There's a huge need right now, and we actually have very little supported living transitional housing in the territory. So we're climbing out of a huge hole, and it needs to be a major focus. It is a key piece in that housing continuum that I was talking about before.
This is likely a topic that will come up in the NWT Legislative Assembly when it begins its fall session tomorrow. MLAs will be focused on the 2025-26 capital budget. It'll fund infrastructure projects like highways, health centers, schools, and housing. Caroline Wozniak is the NWT Minister of Finance and Infrastructure. Without giving anything away proposed in the draft budget, she says one area of infrastructure has tremendous potential.
There's such opportunity if we can advance and get to a place where we are supplying energy and making it available to large industrial consumers. That will bring the price of energy down for everybody else. And it will actually incentivize the investment because this is what the investment communities are looking for. So it's just such a space where there's such opportunity, the possibility for innovation, the possibility for testing. Like there's so much that can happen there. So I've always got my ear tuned for things that are happening in that space. And obviously with capital planning, there's projects that are impacting in that space too.
Other issues that are likely to come up in this sitting include the Integrity Commissioner's report on MLA Richard Ajerikon breaching his code of conduct, and the community of Norman Wells asking that the government declare a state of emergency due to rising costs in the region. The sitting runs until November 1st. In the Yukon, the new Traffic Safety Act is currently working its way through the legislature. The bill may mean sweeping changes for Yukon drivers, but some say not sweeping enough. Katrin Pilkington explains.
The law that currently oversees driving in the Yukon is called the Motor Vehicle Act, and it's 47 years old. For years, the Yukon government has been promising an overhaul, and now it's finally arrived.
Absolutely overdue, and it's been a multi-year process with a significant engagement. So it will provide all manner of tools which hadn't been available previously.
Here in Whitehorse, road safety has been a hot-button issue for months following the death of a local cyclist, which prompted a memorial ride and increased awareness of the issue for many residents. But some advocates say that awareness hasn't translated into action and hasn't found its way into the act.
I think a big gap we saw is there's no recognition of vulnerable road users. And so that's people who are walking, cycling, motorcycles, if there's a collision, we all know that they are the ones who bear the brunt of the collision. So, really, it's not equal for all road users. The risks and responsibilities are different between them. And so recognizing vulnerable road users in the Act we think is really important.
Pearson is hoping it's not too late to amend the Act to include a definition of vulnerable road users.
And I think, the safety of Yukoners on our roadways is something all the parties can get behind, so I don't see why anyone would object to it.
The 244-page bill doesn't mention cycling at all. Pearson says it doesn't address the hazard private vehicles pose to cyclists and pedestrians. The government says it's because the bill is focused on new rules for drivers. Katrin Pilkington, CBC News, Whitehorse.
People living in West Dawson are again cut off from Dawson City, Yukon. The George Black Ferry made its last trip of the year this afternoon. People in West Dawson now have to wait for the ice bridge to form in order to get across the river. Yukon's Highways and Public Works Minister says leaving the ferry in any later would pose safety risks to employees and passengers. Last year, a lack of ice meant an official ice bridge was never opened. In the NWT, the Wakazi Land and Water Board wants Diavik Diamond Mine to look well into the future when planning for its closure. The mine is currently planning based on 100-year climate change scenarios, but the board says that's not enough, and Rio Tinto, the company that owns the mine, needs to look even further out. Diavik is located in a zone of continuous permafrost, meaning the ground is permanently frozen. Parts of the closure plan use that cold temperature to keep things frozen in place, like potentially acid-generating rock. That's why it's important to know how the climate might change in the years to come, and it's why the board wants the closure plan to look even further to the future. Diavik has until the end of April 2025 to provide an updated closure and reclamation plan. Some other things that still haven't been agreed upon include water quality criteria, whether or not to revegetate, and how long monitoring will last after the mine is closed. As the country tries to hit its net zero emissions target, wind and solar energy installations are on the rise in Canada. But all those new solar panels and wind turbines also raise questions, including what to do with them when they reach the end of their lifespan. Paula Duhotchek explains.
This panel is no longer useful.
Inside this warehouse are thousands and thousands of old, busted up solar panels.
I call it the big green elephant of renewable energy, is the waste material.
Dan Carochi has spent years installing renewable energy infrastructure. His new venture, figuring out how to dismantle and recycle it when it doesn't work anymore.
Renewable energy is a new waste stream. We need to get future ready in order to manage that waste so it doesn't end up in landfills or orphaned.
Some provinces are mulling how to bring these materials into their recycling systems, but coordinated programs and facilities are rare. That has some companies thinking about how to turn that trash into treasure.
I think companies that are thinking about recycling now and thinking about what opportunity they can get from the reuse of the steel and the copper and the precious metals in these projects are really going to be in boom times in 20 years or so when these projects come to the end of their lifespan here.
According to the University of Ottawa's Smart Prosperity Institute, by 2050, the country will be dealing with at least 365,000 tons of expired solar panel waste and 4.5 million tons of waste from wind turbines.
And then what we're doing is we're creating other environmental problems while trying to address the climate problem. We need to move fast on climate, but we need to make sure we're not creating additional problems along the side of it.
What you can see here is just a fraction of what we've collected from various projects.
As for Dan Carochi, he's not waiting around.
The underlying message that we've gotten from everybody is that it's too early for renewable energy waste recycling. But as you can see, it's definitely not too early. Like, we are behind the times. We need to get future ready.
He hopes to have a recycling facility up and running by the end of the year. Paula Duhotchek, CBC News, Brooks, Alberta.
The dirty underbelly of capitalism is exploitation.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
Never got paid, never got their due, never got their acknowledgement, never got their awards, never got their flowers.
Don't miss Paid in Full, a 3-part series. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Release him.
Why?
Well, I would say it's extremely bad form to arrest your new boss.
was actually in my custody.
What did he do?
Well,
Did you hear that? I'm being charged with,
This ranch isn't going down. Not on my watch.
Holy crap, I'm here! Ah! Heart is pounding. This is very hard to do. Where am I?
We both know it's not an easy task.
The Great Canadian Baking Show. Watch free on CBC Gem.
If the car comes with the deal, I'm in.
Cheers, dragons!
I look forward to fighting you on many a deal.
And we look forward to meeting you.
Dragon's Den. Watch free on CBC Gem.
The question is,
and I'm just going to ask,
I want to ask you, but
why is this such a big deal? What does the science say?
what was their reaction?
What are we talking about here?
Who told you?
So, to be clear, what is the actual story there?
I think we can explain.
Nunavut's Member of Parliament is calling on the Liberal government to honour its promise to supply funding for Redfish Arts Studio. Speaking in the House of Commons last week, Lori Idlout says the studio's programs help youth stay out of the criminal justice system and teach important skills. She says the Cambridge-based studio should get the money it was promised.
This government promised Redfish funding last April, but when the Prime Minister shuffled his cabinet, the new minister cancelled not only their funding, but the much-needed funding for Indigenous languages. Indigenous peoples deserve better than broken promises.
Idlout says Indigenous youth are already disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, and the federal government should be supporting programs like those offered at Redfish. A union in the Yukon has put the territorial government on notice over lead in school drinking water. A grievance filed by the Yukon Employees Union states that the territory failed to inform union members of the risks. President Justin Lemford says that is unacceptable. He says for years the territory has chosen not to act. Among other things, the union is demanding the Yukon government test sources like fountains within 45 days. The union wants the territory to decommission fixtures that exceed safe drinking water levels also within 45 days. Lemford says the union also wants the Yukon government to make the test results public.
Well, if I'm predicting the future based on their past actions, I would say I have low confidence. My hope is that with this grievance, it enables another way for us to have a conversation with them, but also so that we can bring forward any interests that are coming from outside our awareness. Because it's not just students and teachers, it's also the public that uses these spaces. And when we think about how long this condition has existed or how long it's been known, it could be 5.5 years, but it could be considerably longer.
In spring, the territory pledged to complete the study ahead of the school year, but the Yukon government failed to meet its own deadline. Now the Education Department says the tests will be complete by December. Lemford says the Yukon government has agreed to meet with union representatives Friday. And in Nunavut, it's a race against time to get a new high school in Talojoac sealed before winter hits. The school saw its framework and electrical wiring finished over the summer. Once completed, the high school will also serve as a daycare and community center. The new Talojoac High School is expected to open to students in 2026. The Rankin Inlet Hockey Camp is underway, and the annual event continues to grow in popularity. It runs Monday to Friday this week. Creator and organizer David Clark says the number of participants has gone up significantly from around 90 when it started in 2013 to 250 today. He says the camp is proudly supported by parents and organizations.
I think it just goes to show that having the nice facility and having local coaches and kind of the kids talk about it too, right? So they're excited and they share it with their friends, and it kind of just took on a world of its own, I guess you could say.
Clark says the camp isn't just about hockey. The kids are also learning life skills and literacy. Skateboard season was cut short in Fort Smith NWT this year, and it's not because of bad weather or too much smoke in the sky. Vandalism forced the town to close its skate park just 2 weeks after community volunteers worked to get it fixed and open. Now, the town says it'll likely stay closed until spring. Carla Ulrich has that story.
Large pieces of board were ripped off the side of this half pipe, leaving gaping holes. The damage isn't extreme, but the director of services for the town of Fort Smith says it's a safety hazard. Emily Colucci says it's disappointing to see it vandalized, especially after all the hard work put in by volunteers to restore the park.
This one hurt even more because the community did this. The folks who cared so much about this that they put their own time into it, their own money, their own efforts, and they were proud of the work that they did.
The quick closure of the park has left volunteers and town councillors frustrated. At a recent town hall meeting, Councillor Kevin Campbell expressed his disappointment.
The community that renovated our garden back up and running is disappointed in all of us that we're not getting that repaired fast enough, because they put a lot of hours and time, money into it.
But Colucci says staff is transitioning into winter operations right now and putting most of their time into the arena repairs, so they don't have the people to work on the skate park right now. When they can, staff will be installing cameras in the park, which they hope will act as a deterrent. Colucci says she hopes it doesn't happen again.
Hope someone's watching or listening and realizes that this wasn't a good choice and that better choices could be made next time.
Colucci says she also hopes this incident doesn't take away from all of the hard work and effort that was put into reopening the park by the volunteers. Carla Ulrich, CBC News, Fort Smith.
More than 80 years ago, a young family made an incredible journey to the Yukon, and that story has now come back to the territory. The Albee family traveled on foot through hundreds of kilometers in southern Yukon, and they documented their adventures. Their story inspired countless newspaper and magazine articles, and this film on the trip has now made its way back to the place it was created, thanks in part to a member of the Albee family.
As we said goodbye, little did we realize that these were the last people we were to see all summer. From now on, we were on our own. Our only guide, a sketch map made in 1884.
A couple of years ago, I was searching the internet for any old films related to the Yukon. I do most of the work I do with Yukon Archives relates to their film collection. And I came across a documentary called Family Afoot in the Yukon that belonged to the British Film Institute, and they were getting rid of this film. So I said, well, I'll buy it from you. I've never heard of this film before. So they sent it over, and unfortunately, it had become black and white over the years. It was a beautiful color film at one time, but it lost all its color. So I went looking for a color version of this film. And that led me down to Carmel, California, and then finally to Olympia, Washington, where Bob solved the mystery. He said, actually, I do have some color films of that, and they're with me now. So I thought, this is great.
Eureka.
Eureka is right, yeah.
If he had not contacted me, who knows what would have happened to this film footage. I did want to get it in the right hands of some sort. When Richard called me, I said, you are the guy I want. And it just started to unfold.
What an incredible story. There is a public screening of that old film tonight in Whitehorse, and it looks like a good one. It runs from 7 to 9 p.m. Yukon time at the Yukon Visitor Information Center in downtown Whitehorse. Let's return now to one of our top stories tonight. The airline passengers stranded in Iqaluit who waited for 18 hours yesterday. For some, it was a very frustrating experience, but there was some positivity as well. Musical artists performed at the airport to help lift the passengers' spirits. One of those performers is Jeremy Tungaruk. He says he got a message in the afternoon from an organizer asking if his family could perform. So he scrambled to get his wife and 4 children together and headed down to the airport. He says the atmosphere changed when his family began to perform.
The place actually lit up
it felt like. And when we started singing, more crowd gathered because they were hearing my children sing.
Dungaruk says he also answered questions from passengers on what Nunavut is like. The government of Nunavut reached out to the organization, Outcrop Nunavut, to plan the event. Remembrance Day poppy season is now underway.
To officially launch this year's National Poppy Campaign, Mr. Lawrence will present the first symbolic poppy to the Governor General.
Governor General Mary Simon received the first poppy of the 2024 campaign today at Rideau Hall. Poppies will be available to the public beginning October 25th. Millions of Canadians wear the red flowers leading up to Remembrance Day on November 11th. It's to honor those who serve or have served in the armed forces and those who gave their lives for Canada. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. We leave you tonight with more from Rankin Inlet's hockey camp. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
Heart is pounding.
This is very hard to do.
We both know it's not easy.